You are about to listen to Annie Leonard speaking at the UC Santa Cruz College 9 and 10 Multipurpose Room on Wednesday, February 12, 2014. The event was hosted by the UC Santa Cruz Common Ground Center, Education for a Just and Sustainable World. To find out more, visit kresge.ucsc.edu/common ground.
This morning together, and I just want to thank the Sustainability Office for putting together this great day and collaboration.
Thank you for your
Yeah, the Common Ground Center and the ESLP and the Student Environmental Center putting on these events back to back with Annie today. And it's the beginning here with the permaculture class, then on to lunch, and the big event from 5 to 7 in NPR. Hope you all can be there. And without further ado, I'm just going to pass the mic to Annie to take it away.
Thank you, guys. I'm going to just talk for a little while, and then we can do whatever you want. We can have, you can ask me questions about the things I say. We can have discussion, have an idea about an activity we can do later if we want to, but I'm also open to just talking a bunch. First of all, so thank you so much. I came down with this wicked cold last night, and I was lying in my hotel room sneezing, and I'm a little doped up on Sudafed right now, which is not my prime position, but I feel so much better because there is no better medicine than being in a room full of people working to make the world a better place with the Grateful Dead playing. Oh man, I'm just so much happier right now than I was 10 minutes ago. Thank you so much. This is such a sweet icing on the cake. Is terrapin station. Okay. So I want to talk. You guys are already familiar, I think, with a bunch of my work because I've seen all the videos you had to watch. I hope you're not sick of me. I have a teenage daughter, and they show my videos of her class. She's like, oh my God, I have to watch this again. So I hope you guys haven't reached your max, because I saw that you saw a bunch of my stuff. I want to talk a bit about sort of my journey, and then I want to share with you some of the things that I learned along the way. 3 things in particular that I wish I'd known when I was just starting out, because I could have hit the ground faster and worked even harder. So some of you might know some of this if you read the Sort of Stuff book, but I grew up in Seattle in the Pacific Northwest in an area similar to this, somewhat ecologically and also very culturally, very environmentally aware school and family. My family used to go camping every summer. We had this little Datsun station wagon with load up all our stuff in it, and we'd drive out to the woods. And since this was before the days of DVD players in cars, we used to actually look out the window and talk to each other in practice. And we would notice that every year the strip malls reached a little further. And every year there were more clear cuts, and there was more and more encroachment into the forest. And I remember as a kid looking at that, and I didn't have the vocabulary to even articulate my wondering, my discomfort, but I knew that something just felt wrong. And I knew that when I was in the woods with these trees all around me, something felt so right and so good. And I didn't know back then about trees' role in moderating the hydrological cycle and the climate and all these reasons that we actually need trees to live. I just knew that something felt really good. And so I felt threatened by seeing all these clear cuts. And I remember driving our little car up the mountain roads, and these logging trucks would be coming down that had logs as big in diameter as my car. And I just was like, what? I was like, what? Why? What? I just didn't understand. So I decided actually back then that I thought I was going to be the Secretary of the Interior. That was what I had decided. Secretary of the Interior, because I wanted to save the forest. I ended up going to college in New York City, which is, I'm sure I was the only budding Secretary of the Interior that ever went to college in New York City. But I was just fascinated with the energy and diversity of the city. So I went to college there. And it turned out to be a lonely place for an environmental science major. There were 7 environmental science majors in my class. Not a lot of environmentalists back then. But it turned out to be very fortunate, because that's where I started putting together the pieces and realizing it wasn't just loss of the forest, it was a system-wide problem. And I realized that because my dorm was on 110th Street in Upper Manhattan, and the college was on 116th Street. Every day I'd walk those 6 blocks, and if you spent any time in Manhattan, you know, every single morning there are piles of garbage as high as your eyeballs. The entire street, like the whole entire way, just piles and piles of garbage. And I'm from Seattle. We do not have piles of garbage all over the street. We pride ourselves in our recycling and composting and waste reduction. I was absolutely stunned at the mass of materials that was moving through the environment there, because it was just so much more visible than I had seen at home. So I started wondering what was in all those bags. Obviously, there's a reason to make those garbage bags black, because they don't want you to know what's in it. So you gotta open them up and look at what's in it. And that's why I picked up my habit that I still have to this day, wherever I go. I really recommend this. First thing you gotta do is start looking in the garbage. You can find out so much about a society by looking at the garbage. It's like reading a society's secret journal. If you can, go to a dump. Whenever I go to a new city, go to the dump right away. You find out about social relations, about all kinds of stuff. It's totally great.
Are you saying you're a dumpster diver?
Totally. It's fascinating. It's for sociological purposes, plus really good furniture and stuff. Anyway, you guys all know about that,
We
right?
call it hippie Christmas.
You move out day?
Yeah, no, right, exactly.
So what I saw when I opened the bags, which amazed me, was that it was mostly paper. And so I immediately started making the connections. My beloved trees in the Northwest are being cut down, and then paper in this garbage. And that was 20 years ago. Do you know that still today in the US, 40% of our municipal solid waste is paper? Isn't that stunning when you think about all the opportunities to reduce or recycle or compost? Like 40% of our garbage is paper. So when people say we have a garbage crisis, there's nothing to do with this stuff, it's 40%. We could shrink it by 40% tomorrow. It's just, it is insane. But it was even more than 40% there. It was almost all paper. And I was so freaked out. So every morning I'd go to school, and there's all this stuff in the street. And every day I'd come home, it was gone. I said, where is all of that crap going? I was just fascinated. So I took a field trip to the landfill. I hope you guys do that. You guys take field trips to landfills? You should do that.
Not in this class, but a lot of classes too, yeah.
It is a fascinating experience, and especially New York City's landfill, which was, it's closed now, but it was on Staten Island. It is actually called Fresh Kills Landfill. That's the name of the area. And it is absolutely gigantic and awe-inspiring in the most horrific way. It is, if you stand there, as far as you can see in every single direction is stuff that's been wasted. I was absolutely shocked when I went and saw that. I had been raised by a sort of a mother who grew up after World War II where there was stewardship and responsibility about stuff, and she taught us not to waste, not because we were bumping up against ecological limits, but because losers waste. Like, wasting is just not a responsible thing to do. So here I am, having been raised with this sense of responsibility and stewardship about materials, and I saw that New York City, my beloved city, was just as far as you could see was all of this waste. It's the highest point on the eastern seaboard. Some people say that along with the Great Wall of China, it's one of two man-made structures you can see from space. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's huge, it's huge. And there was furniture and clothes and books. I couldn't believe books and so much food and paper and it was just unbelievable. And I was a sophomore in college. I will never forget that experience of looking out there. What I realized is that we have a huge problem, that we have built our entire economic system on the one-way flow of resources to waste really quickly, and that we were keeping it hidden. I was like, who could have decided everything that ended up in this, and why is it so hidden? So I decided I wanted to figure it out. So I studied garbage at school, and then I went to Washington, D.C. to work for Greenpeace, and it was a really fascinating time to work for Greenpeace. This was in the late 80s, and there was an explosion of interest in garbage because of a couple reasons. One is that a lot of landfills were being filled up, and so companies were now on the lookout, on the prowl for new places to build landfills and incinerators. So these communities were getting really organized. Plus, a bunch of medical waste and garbage was washing up on beaches in Jersey, and so people were freaking out about that. So all of a sudden, everyone was interested in garbage. So our idea was to fight every place that people wanted to put garbage, to make it more expensive, more politically dangerous, more strictly regulated, make it so hard to put waste anywhere that we would build pressure back up the system and get people to not make the waste in the first place. So we wanted to shift the discussion from where can we put this waste, where can we burn it, where can we bury it, to how can we go upstream in the system and design the waste out of existence. So that was our thinking. I was actually inspired by the parking in Manhattan. I don't know if you ever tried to park a car in Manhattan. It's like, you gotta get up at 6 o'clock every morning and move it to the other side of the street because they have alternate side of the street parking. And you get a ticket at $400, they just drive you nuts. And you finally are like, all right, I won't have a car. So we're like, okay, let's do that with garbage. let's just make it so inconvenient to make the stuff that it's easier to avoid it. And this is when a lot of curbside recycling programs started in the country. Some companies and some cities did get on board in reducing waste. We definitely saw some some movement. But there was one thing that we were not expecting, is that some total schmucks were just so committed to continuing to make waste and put it out of sight or out of mind that they started loading it on ships and sending it to third world countries. And we didn't know where it was going. We were just starting to hear cases of this. Like there was a case in Nigeria where some Italian businessmen went to Nigeria, to Cocoa Beach, and they found a farmer and they asked if they could rent his backyard for $50 a month, which was a windfall. This guy was psyched. And they brought in 4,000 barrels of incredibly hazardous waste and loaded it in the backyard. And the villagers had no experience with hazardous waste because there wasn't industry there, but they really liked those barrels. So they took the barrels, they dumped out the waste, they used them for drinking water storage. It was a public health disaster. That was one of the cases that really put this international waste trafficking on the map because there were so many health issues in that town. And so Italy and Nigeria got in a big fight about it. And Nigeria recalled their ambassador from Italy, and Italy had to go clean up the waste and take it back. And then there were riots in the town in Italy where it was going to go, and they burned police cars. And it was like this huge thing all about waste dumping. But there were so many cases like that. And so we were tracking where this waste was going. But Greenpeace needed someone to actually go physically find it and find out what happened. So they said, who wants to go see where this waste is going? And I, at that point, had no child and no mortgage, which is a really sweet time in life. So you guys use that time well. Because I said, I will go. So I spent the next 10 years traveling around the world, tracking where our waste was going in other countries. I went to Haiti, where the city of Philadelphia had been burning garbage in a garbage incinerator, which is the stupidest thing you can do with garbage. I must come back to that actually, consideration later. But it's really stupid for many reasons, including that you get this heavy metal laden ash that is more hazardous than the garbage you were burning, because the process of burning it makes more hazardous chemicals, products, and combustion and all that. You're left with this really hazardous ash. The city of Philadelphia had this huge mountain of it on this lot next to their garbage incinerator. They hired a company to get rid of it. They put it on a ship, and they first went to Panama. They said it was road fill, and they were going to use it to fill in a swamp. But we hired Lloyd's of London to track this ship and tell us everywhere it went. And everywhere it went, we would go alert the ambassadors to that area, because we were in DC. So Panama turned it away. This ship ended up sailing around the world for 27 months. 4 times it got a paint job and a different name, but we were able to track it the entire time. Everywhere it went, we would warn people. At one point, we lost it just for a couple of days, and it went to Haiti and said that this ash was fertilizer, and dumped 4,000 tons of it on the beach in Haiti. And Haiti's constitution actually prohibits importing waste, but the ship didn't care. And then the government stopped the unloading and said, you have to load it back up and leave, and the ship just left and left it on the beach in Haiti. There were so many cases like this. There was another case that I was involved in South Africa. This was when apartheid was still there. And so, it's still there economically, but this was when legally apartheid was still there. And there was a company in New Jersey that had mercury waste. And mercury, as I'm sure you all know, is a very potent neurotoxin. And so they sent the mercury to South Africa, supposedly to be recycled, but it was never actually recycled. We don't know if the company ever was really going to recycle it. They just had, we went to the facility, they had these like swimming pools full of mercury waste. Mercury is so dangerous. And when it would rain, the stuff would overflow. And it flowed into this river that went through a black township. And because of apartheid, the people could not move. They had to live there. And this river went through there. And that's what they used for washing their clothes and dishes and bathing. And we sampled the sediment of the soil in that river. It was over 8,000 times the mercury levels of what would be considered hazardous waste in our country. And their water is flowing through it. Yeah, so I go on and on and on. I went to so many places all over the world. I went to China a lot because a lot of our plastic waste that, even now, plastic waste that we put in recycling bins is going to China. I followed e-waste to Africa and Asia. Anyway, I did this for 10 years. It was really interesting. It was also interesting from the international activist perspective. A lot of less industrialized countries are used to white environmentalists coming down and saying, you Brazilians cannot cut down your trees because we cut down all of ours and the planet needs yours. Or you guys cannot have cars because we already have too many cars and the planet's stressed. Or you stop having so many babies. Or, our country is good at sending people elsewhere and telling other folks what they could do. Instead, I would go to places and say, hey, I'm here to warn you, my country is sending a ship of hazardous waste right now. This is what the waste is. This is how it would be required to be disposed of in the US. This is what's being proposed here. You guys want to fight it? So I was very popular. It was really fun. And in the process, because it's so political, when it was usually the US, but it was also Australia, Japan, and Europe. They were doing it too. But it's so political when one of the wealthiest countries in the world dumps waste on one of the poorest, that it mobilized people to fight this, because they called it toxic imperialism. Like, it was just so obviously wrong. It mobilized people to fight that, and in the process, they learned about hazardous waste and all kinds of waste issues. And so then they started looking around locally and seeing what factories were releasing what into the rivers. And it was really an incredible decade in terms of seeding and nurturing a movement against toxic chemicals and for environmental justice all around the world.
I just had a quick question. Was a lot of this work before or after the Basel Convention?
It led up to the Basel Convention.
Oh, okay.
That was our idea, the Basel Convention.
Okay.
We at Green Case were sick of chasing these ships all around the world. So we said, let's get a UN convention to outlaw the practice. And we had an incredibly sophisticated political strategy for this. We called it, other people called it international waste trade. We called it international waste trafficking. Like, we really wanted to make it delegitimize this process. The advocates of it said things like, it's providing jobs. I debated this industry guy, who was incredible. He said, you know, these countries don't have their own industries yet, so they don't know how to handle hazardous waste, so we're giving them opportunities to practice on ours. Fuck you. It's like, that's so crazy.
It's going to create jobs.
Oh yeah, cleaning up that mess. And then doctors to take care of all the sick people. Anyway, so we got this idea to get an international convention to outlaw hazardous waste exports. And it was a fascinating process. The way that we did it politically is that we locked in regional governmental bodies. So there's the Organization of African Unity, there's SARC, there's different regional governmental bodies, like Central America has a regional governmental body, all these different regions. So we would go to those countries and really publicize waste import cases, which was political disaster for some president to allow some waste to come in from, you know, the imperialist United States to be dumped in Central America or something. So we would lock in these regional bodies. They would all say, yes, they don't want waste imports. And then they started having international meetings, and then they were already locked in. They had to say they didn't want the waste imports because they had these regional bodies. And so it reached the point in the UN negotiations, which is extremely rare, where there was total unity among what's called the G77 countries, that are the less industrialized countries, and saying they did not want waste imports. The truth is, some of them did want it, because it's really lucrative. And Brazil and India, South Africa, they actually kind of wanted to keep taking the waste. Some of their government people did. But none of them were willing to break that political unity, because it would have been such political suicide to break the unity. And so going into the Basel Convention, these UN conventions take the name of whatever city they're signed, and the final negotiating session was in Basel, Switzerland, which is why it's called the Basel Convention. There was an interesting thing going into that. I was living in India at the time. We heard a tip that India was going to break ranks with the G77 going into this. We were terrified, because if India broke ranks, South Korea, Brazil, South Africa, all these other countries that actually were totally fine polluting their people for money would have joined them. So we had to not let India break ranks. We're like, what are we going to do? So we decided to do a little case study of one of the waste importing places in India. So I went to Bhopal, which you might know because of the carbide disaster. This is unrelated, except it was just in the same place. There was a huge waste importing company there. I had to get in and take some pictures. So I posed as a student. I went to the head of the guy who's in charge of all the industrial development. I wore my high ponytail and smiled a lot. I said, it's so neat how you're helping India develop. You know, and I said I was there because my sister was getting married to some guy from USAID, and there was a wedding there, and I'm doing my research while I was there. I had this whole thing. Anyway, so I said, I would love to have a tour of one of these factories. Could that be possible? But I wanted to see this factory, and there was 400 factories. So I said, oh, you know, Mr. Patel, that's like saying Mr. Jones. I was like, Mr. Patel said I should visit this one. Anyway, I get a tour of this factory finally. unbelievable. Hazardous waste everywhere. People working, what they're doing is they're trying to pull out some of the useful metals out of the hazardous waste, but it's everywhere. People wearing just lungies, it's like a cloth sarong, and tank tops, no shoes, nothing. Lifting baskets of it on their heads to carry it with it dripping. I was like, oh my God. So I had this bag with a camera in it. This was before tiny little digital cameras. And I learned a trick. If you want somebody to not look in your bag of your camera in India, is you put a box of tampons on top. And when the security guard opens the bag, they're like, oh! That is the trick if you ever need to smuggle a camera into a factory in South Asia. So I took all these pictures. I was like, oh my God, it was incredible what we saw. So I documented the whole thing. So then what happened is, by the grace of God, the Indian government was very good friends with the head of this factory. And so we didn't even know, he was taking the head of this factory to the negotiating session in Switzerland to be the model of how great India's recycling is and how much India could handle hazardous waste imports. We were like, you're kidding! Like, there's millions of industries in India. That was so beautiful that he took him along. So we made this like 5-minute documentary on it. I get you a copy. It's called Slow Motion Bhopal, about the slow hazardous contamination from these factories. We also interviewed the environment minister. This was a little bit sneaky, but it was funny. The environment minister was a total crook, and he was very, very close ties with all kinds of industrial polluters. So we hired this film company from London, and they didn't lie. They just said sentences that were not related. They called up the environment minister and they said, we are a film company from London. We make many films for the BBC, period. We're working on one now. So it sounded like it was the BBC, even though they didn't really lie. They said, we're working on one now about environment in India or whatever. So he said, can we come interview you? And the guy was all happy to be interviewed. So they asked him all these questions about tigers and all these other things we didn't care about. And then they asked him about hazardous waste, and he wasn't on guard because he didn't know that's what the film was about. And so he said, oh, we absolutely can import hazardous waste. We have very modern technologies, highest worker health and safety, wonderful facilities. It's helping us develop. So we got the environment minister saying all this stuff on film. So we made this film with the footage I had gotten of these people with hazardous waste pouring down them and dumping it into the rivers, and with his voice over it saying, oh, we have the most modern facilities. So we go to this international negotiation in Switzerland, and we know India is about to break ranks and say they want to import hazardous waste. They happen to have the owner of this factory with them that they're saying is the case study. Like, how beautiful is that? And so we said, hey guys, we have this film. Want to look at it? So we showed it to them. We said, if you break ranks, we're going to show this film at this meeting. And they said, we're breaking ranks. And they went forward and said, we want to import hazardous waste. And so we sort of said, if anybody would like to see a film about these fabulous facilities, come see it. The room was packed. Everyone came to see the film, all these international delegates. The guys lost all their credibility. We had coordinated at the same time in front of the Environment Ministry in India, huge protests where people said, our government's selling us out, we are not the rubbish bin of the West. Huge political outcry, both in India and in Switzerland. India said, never mind, and this was quiet, and we got the Basel Convention passed. Nice. So it was really exciting. So the Basel Convention is an excellent international tool. It bans the import, the international trade of hazardous waste from OECD to non-OECD countries. We use that terminology because if you say from developing to less developed, like South Africa and India and Brazil, those are pretty developed. Like, you know, those are all subjective kind of terms, but OECD and non-OECD are very clear who's OECD and who's not OECD. It's incredible convention on international waste trafficking has plummeted since then, but there are some problems with it. One is that there is one industrialized country that has not ratified the convention. Guess who that is? That is us, yes. And so we are the only one that has not ratified the Basel Convention. So one of the things you can do, if you're interested in this, the fabulous group that works on it is called Basel Action Network, BAN, remember BAN, because we want to ban waste exports, ban.org. They're based up in Seattle, and they're a bunch of my old friends from Greenpeace who went and started this organization to keep working on it. And the main waste we export a lot of plastic and garbage. We export weird waste like when the World Trade Centers were blown up, all that contaminated metal went to India. But we also, the most problematic waste we regularly export now is e-waste, is our old electronics and stuff. Our e-waste is the fastest growing part of the municipal waste stream. and the most hazardous, because all of those electronics have lead, cadmium, mercury, but they also have little tiny bits of gold and silver and copper. And so we send them to, unfortunately, most of them are not recycled, but of the ones that are recycled, 80% of that stuff is shipped to Asia and Africa. And BAN has some excellent exposés. They're still going and sneaking into factories and taking pictures like I used to do. They have some great, they have a film called Exporting Harm that you might want to show here on campus. It's really an absolute outrage, the way that we are churning through all these electronics and then just exporting it overseas. Anyway, so I did that for over 10 years. At the beginning of the story stuff, when I say I spent 10 years traveling the world, looking at where our stuff comes from and where it goes, that's how I did it. People often ask, like, how did you do that? Are you like rich and weird that you just did that? But that's how I did this. I worked in your case. Then when I came back to the US, I was frustrated at how little people were aware of the lives of all of our stuff, all this stuff before it comes to us and after it's with us. Like we know the very short period of its life when we like it, which is sometimes 2 minutes, but sometimes longer. But the before and after was sort of invisible. So I started experimenting with different ways of talking about it. And that's how I came up with the Store of Stuff. I put the Store of Stuff up online in 2007. My goal was to get 50,000 people to watch it in 10 years, and everyone said that's never going to happen because people don't watch 20-minute things online. To my utter amazement, we got 50,000 views in one day. And we're now at over 30 million views. I can go to Google Analytics and see a dot on the Earth. I can look at the whole map of the Earth and see a dot and where someone's watched it. It is every single country in the world. It's been crowdsourced, volunteer translated into over 50 languages. It's absolutely amazing. It's been on the front page of the New York Times, front page of the LA Times, and Time Magazine. It was on Colbert Report with it. It's just absolutely exploded. And it's been incredibly rewarding to me because in a way I feel like the Story of Stuff took the temperature of the public. You know, so I'd always been told as an environmentalist, the public can't understand this stuff, they don't care, you gotta talk down to them, assume an 8th grade level of education. And what I found out with the Story of Stuff is actually people are ready for a really big conversation about what's wrong. The response was incredibly rewarding. The first year alone, I got 250,000 emails from people who saw the show and wanted to talk about something. It was fascinating. My favorite one, which really sort of epitomized this, was a woman who wrote in and she said, I'm a Republican SUV driving housewife from Texas. She said, I never thought about any of this stuff. She said, I would not have watched your film if I had known what it was going to be about. She said, but I can't stop thinking about it. She said she looks at everything differently. And she said, I used to take my 2 teenage daughters to the mall every Saturday, and I don't want to do that anymore, so what should I do with them instead? I was like, well. So that's sort of my journey of how I got to here. You guys have any questions before I go to my 3 nuggets of wisdom and learnings that I would like to share with you? Any thoughts or questions?
For questions now, or?
I'll take a little break and then, so you got questions and then we'll.
Okay. All right, so I've noticed just in a lot of developing nations, people tend to, their waste management systems aren't as refined here. Basically, they haven't developed the systems of hiding it nearly as well, especially in rural communities, where there's a lot of inputs of plastic and trash and things that don't break down rapidly over time, but those things end up accumulating on places that are hard to get to, hillsides and whatnot, and they're just really, really ugly in your face. I remember at one point, I was in a little community in Nicaragua I was working in, and there was a guy who ran a nursery there. And a lot of these people don't have really, they haven't been educated in the same sense of like the higher educated people who, but yeah, they have good education there in their daily lives. And he was going and picking up trash on the dirt road, and he looked at me and said, "Esta basura es la tristeza más grande del mundo." This is the greatest sadness in the world. And just the truth of it, with which he said it, was kind of just so real, and it really touched me so profoundly. As, man, this is kind of our legacy in the West. And I guess the question is, do you think these people are more conscientious of their trash use because it's more in their face, because they haven't refined the methods of hiding it as well?
I think it's complex and fascinating. One issue is that in a lot of places, plastic is a newer introduction. And so if you were wrapping your tamales in banana leaf peels, you could throw your banana leaf there. Or, I don't know if any of you guys have been to India, and people ride trains everywhere in India, and these kids come around and sell you tea with these little clay cups that are just clay that haven't been fired or haven't been painted or anything. They're just raw clay, and they last just long enough for you to drink your cup of tea, and then it starts to disintegrate, so you just chuck it out the window. First rain, it's gone. Or I lived in Bangladesh for 6 months. Every single morning, we would get fresh yogurt in a terracotta pot that had just been made overnight. You eat the yogurt, you just literally drop it in the backyard, the next rain, it's gone. And so when they had systems like that, and then you're introducing these new materials without the infrastructure development, then you have these huge problems. On top of that, we're sending them our own garbage too, so we're adding to it. So that's one of the issues, is that the materials are changing faster than the infrastructure is developing. But in a lot of places, there really is recycling that is not visible. In every place I have ever been, and increasingly in the United States now too, the poorest of the poor people they have an informal recycling network. And you will see when you go to developing countries, I'm sure you saw it, these kids with bags on their back that are going around picking through the garbage. And they specialize in, certain metals or plastics, and they're experts in materials. These little kids can touch a little piece of plastic and tell you if it's PET or HDPE, and they collect it all and they sell it to a middleman, and it moves up the system and is recycled. I was in Bulgaria recently, and they said there's absolutely no recycling there. And there is some kind of recycling everywhere, even if it's just the really valuable stuff like aluminum. There's always some recycling. There's some poor person pulling through the garbage and pulling something out that's usable. So I said, I don't believe that there's no recycling. They said, no, there's absolutely not. I said, let's go to the dump. So we go to the dump, and there's all these Roma there with the donkey carts digging through the dump, pulling out pieces of metal to recycle it. That's recycling. So there's a bunch of places to intervene on this. One place to intervene is for us to stop being so wasteful with our resources, because like it or not, we often set a cultural tone for the rest of the world. And the rest of the world watches our media and watches our celebrities and watches our lifestyle. And so we are not only exporting our hazardous waste and exporting our hazardous products we don't want, we are exporting a hazardous lifestyle. And so getting our own house in order here will send a sort of cultural message that you don't have to be so wasteful to be successful. And in fact, you can't be successful if you're so wasteful. So there's that piece. Another piece is that when countries are beginning to develop their waste infrastructure, we want to help them leapfrog over the whole dirty industrial development process where we spent the last 40 years contaminating our water and soil and bodies, and help them go to the best, cleanest technologies. Often what happens is, as we develop our better technologies, we send them our old stuff. Here's a development aid, have a free incinerator. And we would actually like to share with them the best technologies, leapfrog over that. There's a group that's working on waste internationally that I love. It's called Gaia. It stands for the Global Anti-Incinerator Alliance. I keep going back to incinerators because I hate them so much. Gaia was founded partly because myself and a bunch of others, when we were traveling around the world looking at waste imports, so many people wanted to work on waste. Like you said, it is visible everywhere. And it's one of the most unifying issues in the world because everybody has some challenge with waste. And so if you plop down into a barrio in Manila in the Philippines and say, I want to talk about the fundamental unsustainability and injustice of our globalized economic system, can't be too busy. But if you say, hey, you want to figure out what to do with that pile of waste right there? They're like, yes. So waste is an excellent ambassador issue to go in and then start understanding and changing the system that's causing all this. So Gaia has members now in something like 91 or 93 countries all over the world. They have information in Chinese and Spanish, all different languages. It's all people that are working on promoting safe and sustainable and just waste. And one of the things they're doing, which is different than other groups that I love, is when they go into some place like Managua, where there are poor people recycling, if you ask USAID to do it, the USAID will go in, get rid of all those people and build an incinerator to burn all this stuff. They're saying, look, these people already recycle. Let's make their work dignified and safe. So they're getting protective gear, they're getting licenses so the police can't harass them. They're setting up systems so the householders separate the stuff so that they call them scavengers or informal recyclers, so that they're not having to sort all the stuff. They're building a sustainable indigenous waste recycling system based on what's already happening rather than displacing them. It's the only people I know that are working on waste with a social justice perspective. They're great. So they could give you lots of resources for Guatemala. But that's what I love about waste, is it's such a good ambassador issue. Is people all over the world got piles of waste on the street and they want to know what to do about it. Sorry to answer this so long. Yes.
So in one of the videos is like the story of, I think it was like Citizens United versus FEC. Yeah, you said you were your group was working on a bill to retract the corporates are people. And I'm just curious, because that video was released in 2010 and I haven't heard much about that moving forward. And so I just wanted to know how is that going and where are you guys at with that?
So it's not so much a bill. I wish that we could get a bill to retract a Supreme Court case, but the only way to retract a Supreme Court decision is to get a constitutional amendment. And that's a really big deal, to get a constitutional amendment. We're looking at a 10-year struggle. It is going so much better than we expected. There are already over 100 cities, and I forget how many states it is now. Something, I don't know, it's on our website, I'm sure. There's over a dozen states that have passed resolutions saying they support a constitutional amendment. It's going to be a long, long haul. Ask any of your mothers who worked on the Equal Rights Amendment. Constitutional amendments are a lifetime struggle. So we are going to work on that because that's the only way to really stop it. But in the meantime, there are a number of bills that are being introduced that would lessen the impact of it. There are bills that would limit how much money corporations can spend, bills that would require that if a corporation is going to spend money on a political campaign, that they have to get permission from the shareholders of the corporation. There's different sort of stopgap measures like that. The partner that we work with on that issue that is so good is Public Citizen. So if you want to get involved, go to Public Citizen's website and sign up there. They have excellent organizing tools and kits. We're about to release a house party kit for people who want to organize on it locally, that you can show that film, and it has a whole bunch of ideas of ways to get involved. So sign up on our site for that, or email us and we'll send you a copy. It is going to be a long, long, long struggle. This is in many ways the struggle of your generation, is to reclaim our democracy from corporations. And it will take your entire generation. This is a lifelong struggle, but I believe it is the most important battle that we face right now as a democracy, because it is the biggest impediment to any positive change that we want. Whether you care about transportation or climate or energy or waste or human rights or public education or a social safety net or anything that you care about, this is the biggest impediment. It's very interesting what I've seen happen over my career as an environmental activist. When I started in the 1980s, people still believed that government was an effective tool to make change, because in the 1970s, all these laws were passed, Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Endangered Species Act. Like, everybody was on this roll of, wow, government can actually take action. So in the 1980s, people still believed that, and were lobbying and stuff. And then Reagan comes in. And then we get the Bushes, too, so that even further eroded it. But during Reagan and Bush, and even in Clinton, government was so unresponsive to citizen engagement that a lot of activists gave up on working within government. And they pulled out of lobbying and advocacy, and they worked on what you call market campaigns, is getting companies to change. And so you see this with excellent groups like Forest Ethics, Rainforest Action Network. They did some really fabulous things. Like they get Office Depot to stop using rainforest or old growth wood, or there was a campaign against Victoria's Secret they did for years to get rid of Victoria's Secret. They mail out like 9 billion catalogs a minute or something.
Oh my God.
It was old growth forest, so they got, there's plenty of other things you'd like to change about Victoria's Secret, but one was that they used old growth forest for these stupid catalogs. And so they did a campaign, what's called a market campaign, where you're trying to make change in the marketplace instead of our democracy. They had women wearing lingerie carrying chainsaws in front of Victoria's Secret. I mean, it's very funny and catchy. And it worked. Victoria's Secret changed. There's a coalition I work with called Healthcare Without Harm that's trying to get the healthcare industry to not be such a cause of environmental harm. So I remember one meeting where they were talking about mercury. And the mercury, when you use mercury thermometers, they break and the mercury goes down the drain in your house. And it's a huge problem, all that mercury going into the ocean. So they said, okay, we want to get rid of mercury thermometers. We can try to lobby for a law that bans mercury thermometers, which would take our entire lives and maybe not win. Or we could do market campaigns. So they chose market campaigns. Within 1 year, they had 26,000 drugstores agreeing not to sell mercury thermometers. Now, there are none. There are none. You guys even know what a mercury thermometer is? Like, they're not there anymore. There are none. And they did that whole thing without legislation. So those are called market campaigns, where you make change within the marketplace. The attraction of them is they're fun, and you can make them creative, and you can like hang banners on Home Depot, or harass Walmart, or it's fun to harass these big nasty companies. So it's fun. It's very engaging for the public. You got the David and Goliaths thing. You can be really creative, and these companies are much more brand sensitive, so they respond faster than the government. So they win. You win all these victories, and the market campaigns have just chalked up incredible victories. The problem is, while we turned our back on the government, the corporations moved in. So we now have a situation where corporations have our government hostage and people are not engaging. And so one of the things I've been saying is, great, make change in the marketplace, but also let's get back involved in the government. And it's a hard sell to make, honestly, because making change through the government is slow, and often city council meetings and GAO reports and congressional hearings, sometimes they're boring. It's not as much fun as walking around in Victoria's Secret in your lingerie with a chainsaw. It's a slog, but if we do not get the corporations out of our government and get the people back in, we can kiss all of our visions for a better future goodbye, because the government is the primary tool that we have for doing it. So I think this is the most important battle that we have, is to get the government back. Sometimes people say, but the government is totally run by corporations, we can't do anything, everything, why should they even try, because Exxon and Mobil and Monsanto are in the way. And sometimes I think of it as like if you had a car. If you had a car and you built that car to take you someplace, like we built our government to take us to a more fair, better society. That's what our government should be like. If you built a car to go somewhere, and someone comes and hijacks your car and starts driving it in the other direction and is mowing down poor people and brown people and trees and wildlife, do you just say, man, the car sucks, and walk away? No, you say, give me back my car. And that's what we got to do with our government. We say, give me back my government. It's my government. It's not the government sucks. It's our government sucks. It's ours. We pay their bills. We are paying for them. They are working for us. And if you're paying someone and they're slacking off, you don't just write it off. You say, get to work, man. So we've really got to re-engage as citizens in our democracy.
Yeah, now apparently this generation votes more than any other generation alive today. It used to be the boomers and the hippie generation, but this generation votes as much, if not more.
And I know there's a backlash against voting because of that stupid Russell Brand video that was going around Facebook where he talked about he doesn't vote. What an idiot. The thing is, voting is not going to change the world. He says, I'm not voting because it doesn't make a difference, especially when hardly anybody votes. I mean, voting is a tactical step. It is not that voting alone will solve things, but voting is a tactical step. And even though there are a few politicians that we love out there, some are better than others. And some will provide a stronger social safety net than others. And some will cut food for poor kids in schools, and some will not. There are actual differences. And so voting is really important. It is necessary and sufficient. We've got to vote, but then we've also got to stay on it when they get in office to hold their feet to the fire. And we've got to run ourselves. We've got to be willing to step up to the plate too. Yes?
So this kind of just like supplements what you were talking about a little bit. What do you think as far as market campaigns is more effective approach? Because like you were saying, I guess would that be a market campaign could be useful for a bigger conversation, do you think? To bring people in, because I have this idea of just one day everybody leave your trash at Walmart. And so I was just thinking like, well, that would be kind of like a market campaign, but at the same rate, like would that just, then all of a sudden that kind of makes us like these rebels, and I don't know, and then how effective could we be to come in later with some kind of political change? So I was wondering if you could speak to that like sequence of events.
It's a tough question of are market campaigns or political campaigns more effective. market campaigns, you can win faster, and there actually was a group in England that did that, the Women's Environmental Network, and they started this thing where when you go through whatever grocery store you go through, you take all the extra packaging and leave it in the store, and then you leave. And that started pressuring the store, because then they had to deal with the packaging. And so then the store started saying to suppliers, can you figure out how to make less packaging? So that can work. It works for raising awareness. Definitely works for raising awareness. It can pressure a piece of the market. The thing is, it takes so long to go company by company by company to get them to change. That's why I like laws. The thing that Europe did that really made a big difference is they passed a European Union-wide waste framework directive that required companies have to pay money into a waste management fund based on what kind of packaging they use. And it's more money if they use more packaging, and it's more money if they use worse packaging. So if they have a PVC box, they're going to pay more than if they have a paper box, because paper can be recycled and PVC cannot. And so you see in Europe, toothpaste no longer comes in cardboard boxes, it comes in with tubes that stand up. Because why? The company didn't want to pay the extra money for the box. So it's not really clear if it's market campaigns or policy is better. It's really both. And market campaigns can be used to raise awareness, to build the public support for the kind of policy that we need. Market campaigns can also erode resistance to the policy. So for example, if you get some company to stop using PVC, which is the worst kind of plastic that everyone should stop using, if you harass one company so much to stop using PVC that they have to do it to protect their brand, then they're going to support policy to stop using PVC, because otherwise they feel like they're being penalized compared to all the other companies. So getting some of the environmental leaders of the companies to make a change can actually recruit them over to be allies to get policy, and then everybody has to adopt it. So they really go hand in hand, market campaigns and political action. When I'm thinking about where to plug in, one of the things I think about is what excites me. You have to look at what excites you. When you think about where to plug in, there's the issue of where's the most strategic place, but there's also how do you want to spend your day? It's your life. Some people love doing creative stuff, so they want to organize incredible puppet shows and street theaters in front of Victoria's Secret. Other people are really fascinated by the political process, so they want to do that. You got to find what turns you on and what your passion is, because that way it's not a chore, it is a joy to do this work. That actually moves me into I'm going to share my 3 nuggets of advice. So my first nugget of advice is to find what that passion is and to stick with it, and to hold on to that as much as you can through life, because there will be so many pressures trying to push you away from your passion. I mean, my passion when I was a sophomore in college, I was like, it's garbage, that's it. Can you imagine my parents are like going broke, sending me off to this fancy college on the East Coast, and I call them and say, I found it, Mom and Dad, guess what, it's garbage. I'm really lucky that they were not upset about this. They were unclear what my professional career path would look like, but there was no career path on garbage, and I made one anyway because I stayed so true to my passion that a mission-driven, purpose-driven life is the best way to live. Now, when I graduated from school, and I went to Washington, D.C. to work for Greenpeace, I was broke. They hardly paid anything. I lived in this group house with all these other broke people with our furniture from the garbage. We learned where all the free congressional receptions were so that we could get free dinners. You just sort of learned how to scavenge in D.C. as an underpaid intern, because there's a lot of them. And some of my friends went and worked for companies. And I'll tell you, I admit, when I would go visit their houses, they lived in a really nice apartment by themselves instead of a dumpy group house. They had a really nice stereo, they had a really nice car. And I admit being like, did I make the right choice here? Because I really like that outfit and wish that was mine. But you know what? In 6 months or a year, they were bored and they were miserable and they didn't like going to work. And I am almost 50 and I love going to work every single day. And especially as now that I'm nearing 50 and getting into that stage of my life, I look at what people have done since college and now. Some people basically traded their days away for stuff. And they have a bigger house and a fancier car and all this stuff. But those days are gone. They can't get those back. I stuck with my passion and I lived more modestly. Modestly was what has allowed me to do that. And I have had the richest life. And there's some interesting data actually about happiness and what provides happiness. Because we are constantly told that what will make us happy is new boots, a new iPhone, a new car, and all this new stuff. But when you actually look at the data, as I said in the story of stuff, is that happiness levels in the US are declining. And that is so interesting because we have more, better, cooler stuff than anybody else except maybe people in the United Arab Emirates. You know, those kind of places, they have a lot of stuff too. But we have a lot of stuff. We have more stuff than our grandparents could have dreamed of. We have more stuff than royalty used to have, yet we're not as happy. So I was curious about this, so I did a bunch of research into what actually makes people happy, what provides lasting happiness. And it's really consistent. Once your basic needs are met, if you do not have a roof and food and access to education and healthcare, more stuff can make you happy. But once your basic needs are met, the things that actually make people happy is so consistent across age groups, ethnicities, nationalities, income groups. The number one thing is the quality of our social relations, our social fabric and community. Number two is having a sense of meaning and purpose in life beyond ourselves. And number three is the act of coming together with others towards shared goals, whether it's a sporting team or a political group or a civic group or a volunteer group, but the act of working together with others towards shared goals. And so you know what is so cool about working for a better future? It provides all of those things that make us most happy. And that is so lucky for us that the very things we need to do to turn this country around to be sustainable and just are the very things that make us most happy. So one thing we environmentalists need to do is rework our rap, because we often come off as kind of whiny smarters. You know, it's like, you didn't carry your bag to the grocery store, and you don't have a Prius, and shame on you for having an iPhone. And that is not an effective way to present what we're about. What it's actually about is not being eco-martyrs, but about having a rich and meaningful life, a more rich and meaningful life that is available from any other opportunity out there. So that is my first plea to you all, is resist the many, many social and economic and familial forces that might want to separate you from your passion. The way I see it is that there's sort of a spectrum in life. And one end is the high community and low stuff spectrum, where you decide to invest in your community and your purpose and your mission rather than stuff. And the other end of the spectrum is the high stuff and low community. That's the people who work 80 hours a week in some soul-killing investment banker job and have really, really nice big house and stuff, but no friends around their gigantic dining room table. And I'm not going to tell you where's the right place on this spectrum, but just be aware as you go through life that there are so many forces, starting with the credit card applications you'll get as you near graduation. There's so many things that try to push you that way, and life is sweeter and richer over here. So just be aware of that as you go through life. Yes?
I was wondering if you saw in any other equally developed countries that have higher happiness indexes, if they had consumed less.
Massively, massively. Oh my God, there's such a correlation. The best study I like of this is done by the New Economics Foundation in England. They have a thing called the Happy Planet Index. There's a lot of places that analyze countries by happiness, and there's challenges in determining how happy one is. We can talk about that if you're interested. But it's not reliable to say how happy are you, because we don't actually know how happy we are. So there's studies, there's surveys you can do which ask you questions like, if you lose your wallet with $200 in it in your neighborhood, how likely is it it's going to be returned? Like things like that indicate more of your sense of happiness and well-being. You know what, the Seattle Area Happiness Initiative, their acronym is Say Hi. The Seattle Area Happiness Initiative has this great study on their website that you can take and see how happy you are compared to other people. That's a fascinating thing, is you can see what areas undermine your happiness. Anyway, the Happy Planet Index in London, they look at how happy people are, which is defined by their level of life satisfaction by the times their life expectancy. So it's well-being, it's emotional happiness and health, over how many resources that country uses. So they're looking at how happy you are related to how many resources you use. It's basically a measure of how efficient a country is at converting natural resources into human well-being. This is part of their project called Do Good Lives Have to Cost the Earth? And their analysis is no. The number one country for the last couple of years has been Costa Rica, which has higher life satisfaction and health than we do, and uses 1/4 the resources that we do.
And the military.
Well, that's one of the reasons why, is that they have abolished their offensive military and put all that money into human well-being. Can you imagine
Oh
if we
my
did that?
Right.
We would be happy. So, but it's not just Costa Rica, it's above us. The last one, I think we're around 100, number 113 out of 150 countries. So above us is, of course, all of Scandinavia. You know that. But also all of Europe, all of Asia, all of Latin America, pretty much everyone except for a couple of really repressive Middle Eastern countries and Sub-Saharan Africa are the only ones worse than us. Like, there is so much potential, and the more you look into this, the more you see that consuming more, not only after a point, once your needs are met, doesn't increase your happiness, but it starts to undermine it. And think about it in your own life. Like, it's not that new stuff never makes you happy. Like, I got a new coat 2 years ago. I still, I'm like, every time I put it on, I'm like, I love my new coat. It's so warm. Like, new stuff can make you happy, but the per new thing marginal increment of happiness starts to decrease. So think about it. If you have no shoes, your first pair of shoes makes you really happy. If you have one pair of shoes, your second pair of shoes probably makes you really happy. If you got 20 pairs of shoes, your 21st pair of shoes doesn't add that much more to your happiness. If you've got 300 pairs of shoes, it starts to be a drag, right? Then you got to work to pay for the shoes, you got to find a place to store them, your closet is overflowing. At some point, more stuff actually starts to decrease our happiness, but our internal enough stuff metric has been dulled by our consumeristic society, so we just keep going more and more and more and more and more, but that's not going to, wait a minute, this is no longer serving me or the planet. Yes. Wish she hadn't asked you.
It's more of just a suggestion. I don't know if you've ever seen the UCSC trailer park.
No.
It's right over here. If you have time today, I think you would love it.
Oh, you love it.
It's
Student housing?
yeah, it's student housing. A lot of us live there or have lived there, and it's just a place where these trailers have been there for so long, and they're constantly being reused and reamped, and it's decorated really funky, and it's just living really, you know, you have such a small space, so you have to really select what you want to store in there, although some people can really store a lot of things in there. And there's a lot of stuff that ends up at the trailer park, but it's just a place where I think the focus is on community and on that more simple lifestyle and living with less.
And a good free box.
Great free box.
Awesome.
So you can experience new
So I can
stuff,
free
even
box
though it's really
also.
old stuff. It's just there's a lot of great things. I think it'd be fun to
You know,
visit.
when you look at surveys of people at the end of their life and you ask them when was the happiest time of their life, college always rates near the top. And it's because it is a period of high community and low stuff. And it's true, you've got crappy dorm furniture and crappy cafeteria food and all that, it's true. But you have such rich social fabric. And the more that you can orient your life to maintaining that, I'll tell you, all of my best friends from those periods, we amazingly have got 5 houses in a row in Berkeley. And so we still all live together. And we've taken down all the back fences, and our kids are all growing up together, and we share stuff. You know, we have one pickup truck and one trampoline and one hot tub and one power drill and one scanner, and it's
awesome.
great. It's great. You have access to all this stuff without actually trying to own it. Yeah.
Something I run into with this a lot, with the pursuing your passion, sticking with it, is I find a lot of people are really passionate in college and throughout university studies. They're being preached these amazing ideals throughout whatever study, and they're connecting them with the world around them. And then you just witness them with this cloud over their head as they talk about the student loans and what they have to do to pay it off. And I think that I don't expect you to have an answer for this, but I think it's a really difficult conundrum we face as a generation of students with loans to pay off who need to kind of forsake these ideologies to pay them off, or get really creative and figure out a way to not have loans or get rid of them while pursuing their passion. But I don't know if you have any words of wisdom on that now.
It's terrible, actually, it's crushing. One thing is send a postcard to Elizabeth Warren and tell her thank you for what she's trying to do on this, because she is the brightest hope that I have been seeing some change on this front. I think it is absolutely criminal, the rates that students have to pay these days. And that's one of the pressures that can move us away from our passion. Because reality, you've got to pay your student loans, or some people have to care for family members. I mean, there often are actual financial pressures. My recommendation is if you have to take a higher paid gig that is not part of your passion because of your loans, pay that sucker off as fast as you can and don't get sucked into that higher salaried lifestyle, which is hard because if you go work at someplace with a higher salary, all your friends who went out to fancy restaurants after dinner, wear nicer clothes, it's so easy to get sucked into there. I have so many friends who went to law school, graduated with all these student loans. They all said, we're gonna go work for a firm, pay off our debt, and then go work for public interest group. They all got sucked in except one. She just paid off her debt, just worked her butt off, stayed so focused, didn't get sucked into that higher consumptive lifestyle, and now she works for an environmental group as a lawyer. She's the only one that was able to do it. It is so tempting when you are surrounded by high-consuming individuals to acclimate yourself to that. So think of a mantra that you can say every morning, something that can help you stay focused. Because the faster you can get free of that debt, then the more free you'll be. It is crushing. Crushing. I wish I had an easier answer.
Yeah.
Do you want to take a break and then come back to your 2 points?
Yeah, let me tell my next two. You guys want to take a break? I can keep going.
Keep going.
Let me tell you my next two pieces of advice. This is a little bit about, I just touched on it about how environmentalists need help with our communication. When I got back from living overseas, and I was so like bubbling up with wanting people to talk about this stuff, I sort of did a survey of how environmentalists were talking, and so trying to figure out why are we not getting more traction. When you think about what's at stake, the actual planet that sustains life is in serious trouble, and people are not talking about it. Like that, there's really nothing more important than that. This is our life support system. So I looked at how people were talking about environment, and there was some people that were really, really technical, the sort of Grow Brundtland, World Resources Institute, kind of very, very technical stuff. Like I have a book on my bedside table called Materials Flow in Industrialized Countries. I love that. Most people do not. So that is not going to really work. There's this, shame on you for having an iPhone, this sort of voluntary simplicity. Let's all live in New York City, cardboard tasting burgers all the time. There's the voluntary simplicity piece, which is not going to work for everybody. Not everybody's ready for a yurt and sandals year round. There's the recycle and don't worry about it piece, like that Professor Sazaz talks about. Is shop your way to safety. Just buy this instead of that. Everything's going to be all right. So there's a bunch of different ways of talking about it, but none of them are really getting traction. So I want to tell you about the experience for me where I thought of coming up with this sort of stuff and how helpful it was. I took this really fabulous training program called the Rockwood Leadership Training Program. It's based in the Bay Area. It is a great training program for anybody who wants to make change in the world. I cannot recommend it enough. They have a 3-day thing called the Art of Leadership. But they also have a year-long program. So I did the year-long. There were 20 people in this year-long program. Very diverse, very experienced. It's hard to get into the year-long. So I had the head of the largest gay rights group in the country, the head of Friends of the Earth, a minister from Alabama who worked on social justice and economic equity issues, Van Jones, who some of you might know. Very diverse people in my year-long, not all environmentalists at all. And during the year-long, you meet 4 times over the course of the year. So in the first session, we had this exercise where we had to stand up and talk to people about what our purpose was. And then we had gone through a whole thing about how important it is to stay connected to your purpose, and it's when you get disconnected to your purpose is when you start spinning wheels and being less productive and lose your source of energy. So my purpose is around waste, which is the most fascinating thing in the entire world. So I thought, well, I'm going to stand up here, I'm going to recruit these 20 people to care about what I care about, because it's so interesting. And also because I look at waste so systemically, everything that everybody was working on, I was like, oh, that's related to what I work on. So I stood up there and I thought, this is my chance to recruit these 19 really impressive people to my issue. And so I gave my most advanced 5-minute rap. I said, we need a paradigm shift in our relationship to materials. I used my most sophisticated jargon because I thought if I used my biggest words, I would show them how smart I am, and then they would all want to come and work with me because obviously I know so much about this. And I gave after 20 years of working on this, I gave my most intellectually sophisticated analysis about the paradigm shift we need in our relationship to materials and all this. I was so proud of myself when I was done. And at the end, Eli Parazar, who was the head of Move On, he's a really smart guy, I will never forget this, he raised his hand and he said, I have no idea what you just said. And the whole room did this thing that they all agree, was like, what is there to not understand? We did paradigm shift with our relationship to materials. Isn't that so obvious? And Eli said, I don't even know what you're talking about. He said, what is a material? He said, are you going to the fabric store? He was like, material, what is that? And he said, I don't even know what a material is. It has nothing to do with me. I said, materials are everything. He was sitting on a chair holding a notebook. I said, materials are what you're holding. It's what you're sitting on. And he looks down, and he looks back up, and he said, no, Annie, I'm sitting on a chair. And I said, oh, is that what your brains do when you see this thing? It says chair? And they said, uh-huh. They said, what does your brain do? I said, my brain is like, oh my God, it looks like mahogany or teak. I wonder if it's from Indonesia or Malaysia. I wonder if the Penang people got kicked out to make that. This looks like PVC. It's probably using chemicals. I spent 20 years looking at where stuff comes from, where it goes. So I don't say chair. I am deconstructing all the materials and thinking about the factory that it came from and all this stuff. So I told them that's what my brain does when it sees that. And they said, Annie, you need to get out a little bit more. So they challenged me in how I talked about my stuff. And this changed my life. I wish someone had told me this 20 years ago. So I'm going to share with you the advice that they told me. They told me, one thing they said is that all of my expert jargon served to exclude them from the conversation. I thought that by using big words and technologically sophisticated things that I was exhibiting how much I knew. And they said, if you were applying for a tenure-track professorship job, you might want to talk like that. But they said, really what happened when I talked like that is it served to exclude them. It made people feel in a subtle way disempowered, like they thought, oh, I don't know what she's talking about. Some part of them was like, I'm dumb, I'm not capable of participating in this conversation. I was actually taking away their sense of power and engagement by speaking outside of their realm of experience. Saul Alinsky, who's a famous community organizer, who wrote this great little book everyone should read. It's called Rules for Radicals. He said, talk to people where they're at, not where you're at. Talk to people within their frame of reference. So now when I talk to new audiences, instead of just barging in with all of my whatever expertise, I listen first and I hear what are they already talking about, what's important to them, and then meet them where they are. From the same point, they said that I was starting the conversation 20 years into it. They said they had not spent the last 2 decades sneaking into factories in Pakistan. They had been doing something else. And so they said, come back to the beginning of the conversation. They also told me that my whole conversation was in my head. They said there was no heart, there was no humanity, there was no stories, there was no emotional connection. And I realized, having been trained as a scientist, without even realizing that I realized this until then, I thought heart and emotion and stories, I thought that's fluff for people who don't have the facts. If you've got the facts, just look at the data about the state of the planet. And you look at those charts and Jesus Christ, we've got to do something. But not everyone is moved by facts. People are more moved by stories and connections. So I realized that when I'm talking to people, it's not an opportunity for a brain dump of the facts. It's an opportunity to make a human-to-human, heart-to-heart connection. And if you can make that connection, then together you can discover the facts over time. So I really shifted the way that I speak to be much more human and tell stories and connect with people, because it's not facts that are going to change the world. It's human beings being able to work together. So they challenged me. They told me, speak in an accessible manner. Start at the beginning. Include my humanness in my talk. They challenged me to figure out a way to talk about systems of production and consumption and our paradigm shift in relationship to materials. Van Jones said, I never want to hear you say paradigm shift in relationship to materials in public ever again. They challenged me to figure out a way to talk about that. And so over the 4 times, I tried different ways. On the 3rd time, they said it's a little bit better, but they said, we don't think you are ever going to be able to talk about this in a way that people want to listen to you. They said, it's boring. And so on the 4th one, sort of as my Hail Mary attempt, I got up and I took this piece of butcher paper and I drew an earth and a factory and a store and a house and a dump and an incinerator. I said, okay, you want to start at the beginning? And I just did the story of stuff, like almost as a joke, because they kept saying, make it accessible. And to my amazement, they loved it. They said, that is it. And there was a donor in the room who said, I'll give you money to make a film out of that. And I said, no one's going to watch a film of me doing this. But I kept getting asked to give the talk over and over. And so the talk turned into a 45-minute live lecture that was so popular I could not keep up with requests to give the talk. And so finally, the reason I made the film was because I couldn't be flying all over giving this talk. And so I thought the primary route of distribution was going to be giving people the DVD. When they said, can you come give a talk? I said, no, but here's the DVD. And I was wrong. It just totally exploded. But had I not gotten that feedback from my peers, you wouldn't have invited me here today. I would have been like still talking in a boring technical way. So there were good lessons about how to communicate, but there's also a good lesson about how we can support each other. Because I had been talking in this inaccessible, boring technical way for 20 years and no one told me. The only thing my friends ever said is, you talk a little fast. No one told me it was incomprehensible or boring. And so we need to help each other out. We need to seek authentic feedback from each other. When you give a talk, ask your friends, tell me honestly what worked, what didn't, what could be better, what got traction. One way you can find out now, which is really great, is because of Twitter. It used to be when you give a talk, the person in the audience leans over and says something to the one next to them and you have no idea what they said. But now you can go home and look, and you can see on Twitter, if they thought you were smart or dumb, or what jokes they liked, or what they didn't, or, we gotta seek that feedback to get better. But I want you to just think about that, especially if you're being trained as in a science field, because science people are so data-driven. And what I think is, instead of being data-driven, we need to be data-informed. We need to have that expertise, but I say keep that expertise on tap, not on top. Don't leave it there, because most people do not respond to data. There's an excellent book I really recommend called Switch, How to Talk About Change When Change is Hard. It's by the Heath brothers. And they've done all this analysis about how to talk to people about change in a way that resonates. And they talk in there about studies where they've had lectures to a bunch of adults, and then they come back months later and ask them to fill out surveys to see what they remember. They remember almost no data and no facts, but they remember the stories. And those facts they did remember were those that were embedded in stories. So in our enthusiasm and in our sense of absolute dire crisis that the data evokes, anybody who looks at the data and is not concerned, doesn't know how to read data, in that sense of urgency, we often turn into fire hoses of information that actually push people away. So just think about that when you communicate. How can we connect to people, build the kind of lasting relationships so that we can build a broad, inclusive movement, because that's what it's going to take. That's my second nugget of wisdom I wish I'd learned 20 years earlier. Any questions on that? Or thoughts or reflections?
Just like our corner over here, I've been talking a bit earlier about how we can effectively communicate our platform, essentially, how to not come off as like a demagogue or like we're pushing a point that's an opinion, when we all kind of know, at least in this room, that the environmental issues that we're facing are truths more than opinions. They're more facts than opinions. So yeah, we were just kind of communicating about what are better ways to not come off so authoritative on this to people who aren't already aware of what's going on, or people who are aware but are not willing to accept it.
It is hard. I think practice. Communication is like a muscle. You just got to practice. So practice different tones and approaches and see what works. I really think listening first to find out what people are really interested in can help a lot. I spoke at this college recently where I spoke at a required freshman class. These people were so not interested in being there. They were so zoned out. They were like texting and ignoring me, and the girls had so much makeup on. I could not believe it. I was trying everything I could to get them interested. So I said, all right, let's talk about the reproductive toxics in your eyeliner. And they were like, what? You gotta figure out something that they are already, where they already are. Because either, think of all the conversations happening in the world are sort of like different rooms in a house. And we can stay in our room and try to get everybody to come to our room, or we can see what room's really crowded and go there and start using that as an entree. So practice, talk to people where they are, and try to restrain from saying everything all at once, which is, I know, is so hard because the data is so compelling. One thing I do is have a group of friends that really does get into the data so that I can go get that out of my system. Did you see that new chart? And we can talk about that. But when you go out to the rest of the world, we need to be ambassadors and recruit people, and we need to be more skillful and graceful in how we do it. If we are too whiny and wonky, it turns people off. It leaves them feeling afraid. And fear is not a resourceful place to be. We do not make good judgment when we are afraid. So we don't want to scare people. So the challenge is how to make people awake without being afraid. The other thing is if we just bombard people with data and bad news is that people stop inviting us to parties. And then it's not fun anymore. So we've got to figure out about how to way to weave all these multiple needs that we have together.
So in your videos, you used a couple statistics that were really high about how many people agree that corporations should have less influence and how many people believe that we need to like do something about environmental issues. They were like 85 or 70% respectively. But that's surprising, you know, it doesn't seem like it's that many people, mostly because of the media. So maybe you could talk more about what's going on with the demographics there, like what does it mean when people answer a survey and say that they want less corporate involvement or like think that we need better environmental policy? What's going on with there?
Well, first of all, for all the films, there's a footnoted annotated script on the website. So you can see the actual studies that I'm citing for everything. They're like 20 pages long because I cover my butt so well in those films. Every single thing is footnoted and annotated. So there's references as well as additional thoughts I had on the subject that I couldn't fit into the film. So that's a really important question about where people are in this country and what is it going to take to build a movement. The way I look at the world, the way I've come to see it is, this is the country. Here's everybody in the country. We got 20% here, which is like all of you. 20% on board, get it, understand science, thinking a lot about how to build a movement, already involved in some way in making the world better. We got 20% over here, never going to get it, ideologically opposed to understanding science, more interested in personal profit, just never, ever, ever going to get on board. And then we got 60% in the middle. The 60% in the middle generally agree with us. Most people want to be able to drink water from their tap. Most people want their babies not to be born with toxic chemicals already in their blood. Most people want the planetary climate to stay within the realm in which human life can continue. Like most of these people have some core values. Not everything. They might not agree with us on everything, but most of them have some shared values. I think that our 20% has done a couple things wrong. One is we've spent a lot of time trying to get this last 20% on board. The like super climate deniers. I say screw them. We got 80% of the people. That is a real lot of people. If we can get this 80% active, we are going to change the rules of the game. So these guys are going to start taking public transit because it's going to be cheaper, safer, and faster. These guys are going to start buying cell phones that last longer and don't have toxic chemicals because those are going to be the only ones that are for sale. These guys are going to get on the program because it's going to be the new default. So my first piece of advice is forget that last 20%. They're not going to budge, and it's a time suck. The second thing that our 20% has done wrong, I believe, or that's limited our movement, is we find reasons to exclude some of these 60%. Like maybe they really care about toxic chemicals in the environment, but they're something else we don't like about them. You know, they live in a huge house, or they eat red meat, or you know, whatever. They don't like the Grateful Dead. There's some other thing wrong with them. Okay, so we exclude them. If we screen for commonalities rather than screen for reasons to exclude them, we have almost everybody. We really do have most people. If you look at those polls, the problem is that these people are not active. So our job is less to convince people to care. Our job is less to convince people that we should have personal care products without carcinogens in them. Our job is more to move these people from passively, vaguely concerned to active and engaged. That's our real challenge ahead of us. So I feel like the first 20 years of the environmental movement with convincing people there's a problem, it's clear, okay? You know, we've done a really good job on that. We've been helped by the increasingly visible signs of ecosystem collapse. At this point, to not know there's a problem, you've got to be living in a cave or working at Fox News, right? Like most people know there is a problem. So we now can move from there's a problem part of the conversation to what are we going to do about it. The benefits of that is we start getting action. The other benefits are doing something about it feels good. I just went to a talk in San Francisco last week about plastic. every single person in the audience, it was so heartbreaking, raised their hand and asked some questions about plastic, and they all felt so disempowered, so disengaged, like so flooded with plastic, and there's nothing you can do. And then the horrible panel was like, yeah, government's not gonna have any leadership. Yeah, you can't expect business to do anything. I was like, there's so many things we can do. The doing part feels good. So I'm happy that we're at that stage, is that instead of trying to convince everybody there's a problem, helping people get involved, because that the positive feedback cycle is so strong with that. You make more friends, you get a sense of purpose, you win. Winning feels good. This is where we're going to start to see the movement really explode. If we focus on moving people from being isolated and concerned to together and active. And to do that, we can't bombard them with depressing facts. We've got to offer fun opportunities. You guys all know 350, right? Mm-hmm. 350 is so interesting if you look at their trajectory. They spent the first 4 years of their existence doing collective art projects and bicycle parades and go to the beach and make a giant 350 out of your bodies or shells, or like fun stuff with a little bit of facts thrown in. But what they were doing was they were getting people used to coming together and doing things together. They were building that collective engagement muscle, originally about non-threatening things. You want to go spend the day at the beach? Sure, like that was easy. So now, after 4 or 5 years of getting big numbers of people together doing non-threatening things, now all those people know how to come together and do stuff. Great, guess what we've got to do now? Civil disobedience to stop the Keystone Pipeline. And they already know how to do stuff. If 350 had bombarded people with facts and data about the climate, you would not have 80,000 people so far signing up to take civil disobedience for the Keystone Pipeline, because they made it fun and engaging. So that was my...
Just add in that in response to your question, the Cultural Creatives book by Paul Ray and Sherry Anderson does a lot of the sociological research around values that kind of paints the picture of this 20-20-60 that Annie was talking about. Basically interviewing people since, I believe, the 70s about what their values are around the environment, around women, around gay rights, just you name it, and sort of found there's these moderns, they were saying 50%, and these traditionals 25%, and shrinking rapidly. And they were very surprised to see this emergent third group, the cultural creatives, 25% and growing rapidly, again, because of this generation who kind of comes into life understanding climate change and equality issues and whatnot. So that's, a resource to draw from too.
I think one of the interesting things about that research is that they found over and over when they found these cultural creatives, which are generally people who share the kind of values that I assume we all share, one of the things about these people is they tended to underestimate how many of them there are in the world. They tended to feel alone. And that is the number one email that we get from people, is people say, I feel alone. One person wrote in and said, can you tell me which city has had the most views of story stuff so I can move there because I'm lonely? People write in and they feel alone. And we feel alone because we don't see our values reflected in the mainstream media. I have Yahoo email for my junk mail. Every time I go there, because I'm talking about what Kate Middleton, is that her name? Whatever the princess's name is. Whatever she's wearing, or Selena Gomez going to rehab, or all this Justin Bieber's Lamborghini, all this stuff. I'm like, why is that on the news screen? That is not relevant or interesting or important at all. The things we care about are not reflected to us in the mainstream. So people who share these values tend to feel alone. So many people wrote to me after Story Stuff and said, I knew that, I just didn't know how to say it. Or I knew that, I didn't know how to say it as quickly. people, I feel like the Story of Stuff more than taught people, it touched people. Like people said, yes, I knew that. Why is nobody else talking about this? So one of our jobs is to make this different set of values visible in our day-to-day lives. There's a lot of discussion about how strategic or not strategic individual action is, like recycling and carrying your own bag and using your bottle. And the truth is, me bringing my bottle makes zero environmental impact. I do not kid myself into think that I've done my duty by carrying this. But what it does is it makes a different way of living visible. And that's what's important about the individual action. So when other students see you composting, or see you bike ride, or see you do a clothes swap to get new clothes, that doesn't really lessen CO2 output, but it makes visible a different set of values and norms than people are getting bombarded through the mainstream media. Because because there are more of us than we think. I mean, just think that 30 million people have watched this sort of stuff. I thought it was like some, marginalized lefty rant. And here it is, it's watching it.
I feel like the story stuff is a great example of talking in an accessible manner that is not patronizing. And I was just curious if you had any tips on how to do that.
Well, two things. One is, I think there's a difference between distilling and dumbing down. And especially college-educated folks, we are often told that when we speak out to the public, that we should dumb down what we're saying. And in this story of stuff, I didn't dumb it down, I distilled it. And part of the reason was I didn't think anyone was going to watch it. And thank goodness, because had I thought people were watching it, I might have taken out some of the more edgy stuff, or I might have dumbed it down. I was making the film, not for the general public. I was making the film for my peers in the progressive movement who I thought were too siloed in their work. Like all these people at the Rockwood training that worked on economic equity or social justice or all these other issues that saw that as separate from what I worked on. I was trying to put forth a systemic narrative to show that it's all the same. We're all in the same movement. If we can move from being forest activists and worker safety activists and all these different kinds of activists to being united, we'd have a much more powerful movement. So I thought I was writing and saying it to my peers. I was totally shocked that the general public wanted to watch it. I mean, it's being used in grade schools and churches and corporate trainings, and it's just, I totally was shocked about that. So that's one thing I learned is there's a difference between distilling and dumbing down. But I think the most important way to communicate that is not patronizing is to speak authentically, to just speak from your heart. I used to read Paul Hawken and Bill McKibben stuff, and they're so eloquent, and I'll never be able to write like that. And I would just feel so inadequate, and I thought, oh, I care so much about this, but I will never be able to reach people the way they do, because I just am not a big intellectual, eloquent blah blah. I'll never be able to do that. It's just not who I am. So I always felt so inadequate, and when I stopped trying to be something I wasn't and just started talking the way that I actually talk and saying things like duh, it worked when I actually just started being authentic. So I think if you bring your authentic self to something, you won't be patronizing because you're not a patronizing person. It's when we try to use a voice that's not our authentic self is when it gets messed up. I'll give you my last sort of insight that I want you to take forward, and then I'm happy to just keep chatting. Are you okay at time? Yeah. So my last thing is I'm thinking about change and the kind of change that's needed. When I look at the environmental movement, so I spent about 20 years in Washington, D.C., sort of surrounded by those D.C. kind of groups, and now I'm in California where I think groups are definitely better, but sort of looking at the overall agenda of the environmental movement, I've come to realize that too much of our work is focused on transactional interventions rather than transformational. So I just want to talk for a minute about those two. When I think about transactional versus transformational, the way I think of it is there are a number of really screwed up dynamics of the way that our economy and government works right now. Power relations and built infrastructure and sort of sets of assumptions that our economy is built on. Assumptions like the way to measure progress is by measuring economic activity alone, and that some people are more important than other people, and that being rich is the way to demonstrate your social value, and that pollution is the price of progress, and that a certain level of environmental harm is inevitable and acceptable. All of these sort of assumptions about the way that our economy is built on these assumptions. There are some kinds of interventions that make progress within that screwed up system. Those are transactional, and they're not always bad. So a transactional change could be saving a forest, or banning one chemical, or banning lead in gasoline. That's an example of a transactional solution that actually was really, really good. It's not like all transactional solutions are bad. Banning lead in gasoline has been a huge help for protecting neurological development of inner city kids and lots of other things, but especially that. I mean, there are children that are more adults now that are more intelligent than they would have otherwise been because lead was banned. Excellent transactional solution. The problem with transactional solutions is they're not getting to the root of the cause, and that we will be forever doing them. Transformational solutions are those kinds of interventions and problem solving that change that fundamental screwed up context in which we are working. Transformational solutions are harder, they're scarier, they take longer, they're less politically popular, they're harder to explain, but they are what we need to be doing. So when you figure out where you want to intervene in the system, just be aware of the difference between transactional and transformational solutions. So as an example of a transformational solution that's getting progress right now, there's a group of people advancing a concept called the genuine progress indicator. That right now the way that we measure success in our country is by measuring one thing, which is the level of economic activity alone, the GDP. Anytime money changes hands, it goes to the GDP. A bigger GDP means things are better. And you hear it all the time, every politician saying, we need to stimulate growth, we need to grow the GDP. The problem with that is it doesn't distinguish between economic activity that makes life better and economic activity that makes life worse. So if they build a windmill or a tool lending library or some community building, that gets the same points as if you build another jail. There's no differentiation. Under that way of thinking, the person who contributes the most to our society well-being is a person who just got divorced, just got cancer, just crashed their car. All those things count to increased GDP. And so the genuine progress indicator is a different way of measuring society, of measuring well-being. It says, yes, economic activity is important, but it depends what kind of economic activity. And building a school is not the same as building another jail. And it also says that economic activity alone is not the only thing that measures how well we're doing. But there are other things that measure the health of our children, the quality of our education, the cleanliness of our rivers and air. The genuine progress indicator is a much bigger framework for measuring how we're doing. And they've already gotten it adopted. They just got it adopted in Maryland. So Maryland is going to now start using the genuine progress indicator, and it's about to be adopted in Oregon. And it's starting to spread around the country. There are other states that are also considering it. That is a transformational solution. If we can get, or a transformational intervention, if we can get our policymakers to look at indicators other than just economic activity when they're making decisions, that opens up opportunities for a lot of things that might not contribute as much to economic well-being, but contribute more to health and well-being to then be considered as good. So just as we think about where to intervene, think about transactional and transformational solutions, and making sure that we're not only doing transactional solutions because we can't do them fast enough to stave off ecological collapse. That's my third and final thing I wanted to share. I'm happy to just keep talking. I love talking about this stuff.
I have an idea. This is kind of a change of things, but what if we had people turn to a neighbor and just kind of pair share for a second, just to kind of generate some activity and energy, and then kind of feedback like that? Because I know that there's a lot of questions, but probably everyone has a question, so that would give a little cattiness to it. Let's do that, everyone. Let's just turn to a partner and what came up for you, what was emerging, what was new, what new questions you have.
Or what do you totally disagree with? You don't have to.
So, a little bit further back, you talked about Gaia, the Global Anti-Incinerator Alliance, and I can't remember if it's Sweden or Switzerland. One of those countries is like bragging now about how they are like importing garbage because they've got this system going so well that they're producing all of this energy out of waste. And my understanding is that through those processes, there's a lot of dioxins and chemicals that are being created that aren't being talked about in that process. And I've looked at a lot of, right now I'm looking at compost heat recovery and waste to energy methods, and so I've been exploring different types, and what I see is the majority of the incineration operations are just creating all of these toxins that are going into the environment. And you seem like someone that might have more to say about that topic. And so my question is, what do you think about this waste to energy movement that's kind of just getting started? Do you think, what are some of the best ways that we can take all of this waste material that we have and turn it into something usable instead of just leaving it for the land to try to assimilate it in?
I do have something more to say about that. So first of all, these incinerators are big machines. We put the garbage in and burn. They're calling themselves waste to energy. That is totally bogus. They should be calling themselves a waste of energy. Greenwashing marketing plan. And there's a couple of reasons why. One reason is, if you burn something, say I burn this, it is true that I can capture a portion of the calorific content of this actual thing, the embedded energy that's in this. However, if I burn it, the energy that is lost forever is the energy it took for the trees to be built, for them to grow, to be cut down and moved to the mill, to be processed into paper. All of that energy in producing, extracting, transporting, all that energy is lost if I just burn this. I get a fraction of the BTU of it. But if you recycle this, you're leveraging all that energy, because if you burn it, you have to go grow new trees, cut them down, drive them down to the mill, all this stuff. If I recycle it, we don't have to do that again. So recycling is the way that you save energy. It's not by burning garbage. So Gaia has so many studies on their website that show that there's a massive net energy loss from burning this stuff. So first of all, it's bogus. If they call it waste to energy, you say it's a waste of energy. But they know that. That's just a marketing ploy. Second thing about burning garbage is it is the dirtiest fuel out there. It is dirtier than coal. Think about what is in your garbage. Nail polish remover, oven cleaners. Maybe not in your guys' garbage, but in some people's garbage, there's all that stuff. PVC shower curtains, cans with bisphenol A lining. I mean, our garbage is really, really toxic. So when you burn that stuff is going out the smokestack. You're actually shrinking the volume of the garbage into the ash, but you're increasing the hazardous of it for two reasons. One is that there's a lot of dangerous stuff in our garbage that are elements, like lead and cadmium. You can't, and mercury, you can't destroy an element. That's like a basic law of physics. If lead is in the garbage, which it is, lead and cadmium are in plastics, electronics, if that goes into the incinerator, it comes out the incinerator somewhere. There is no way to destroy an element. So it either comes out the smokestack and then deposits around the environment, around there, or it comes out in the ash. And then that ash gets put in a landfill and then it leaches. But so one thing is you're never going to destroy those hazardous elements. Second thing is you get this other category of pollutants called product of incomplete combustions. These products of incomplete combustions are formed when you burn garbage. The most problematic product of incomplete combustion, or PIC, is dioxin. Dioxin is the most hazardous man-made substance science has discovered. It is enormously hazardous. It's a carcinogen, it's linked to a wide range of health problems. And it comes anytime you burn something that has chlorine in it, like paper that has been bleached with chlorine, like PVC plastic, the C in PVC is chlorine. So dioxin comes from incinerators. Now the way that the incinerator companies say they're going to solve the dioxin problem, and the Europeans have made great advances towards this because they're like big techno-pyromaniacs over there, they love burning their garbage, is they make the combustion chamber operate at a higher temperature. When you make the combustion chamber operate at a higher temperature, you do decrease the amount of dioxins. Then, if you want to recover energy from this, when the garbage is burned, the exhaust gases come out the smokestack, and you want them to stay hot as long as possible to recover the energy. The problem is that then when they go through the cooling down period slowly, the gases are in the prime dioxin formation temperature range, so now the dioxins are forming in the post-combustion chamber. If you want to stop the dioxin from forming, the second the gas leaves the combustion chamber, you quench it, which means you bring the temperature down really fast. But then you can't produce energy from it because you just cooled it so fast. So either you're decreasing the amount of dioxin formation or you're gathering energy from it. You can't do both. So there's a built-in physical inconsistency. So there's all these technical flaws with incineration. But if you look back at the bigger system, think about the bigger system. Incinerators are multi-million, sometimes $billion. They're huge, multi-million-dollar machines designed to destroy resources when we live on a finite planet. Even if you could make them safe, it just doesn't, you could never make them sensible. It doesn't make sense to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to build machines to destroy resources when we should be conserving those resources for further use. The other thing about incinerators is that they operate more efficiently if they operate 24 hours a day, which is why Sweden has to import garbage now, is that you want a constant flow of garbage. They operate less efficiently in what's called batches. If you light it up, burn it, and let it cool down, light it up and burn it, that increases the time that the combustion chamber is in the prime dioxide formation temperature, but it's also just not as efficient. So if your city builds an incinerator, they are like garbage addicts. You have to keep feeding the monster. I have seen all over the world, cities build incinerators and then they start cutting their recycling programs because the incinerator is competing with the recycling for the exact same stuff, because the highest BTU stuff is paper and plastic. So they don't want recyclers to take that stuff, they want the machine. So in many ways, I think incinerators are one of the Achilles heel of our fundamentally unsustainable system. The way that we use materials right now is incredibly wasteful. And so we have this massive clog of waste coming out the back end. Incinerators burn that evidence. They prop up this myth that we can continue to live like this. They waste resources, they pollute the environment, they create toxic chemicals, and they perpetuate a really disposable lifestyle. Now, I don't know what the status is of it now, but there was a proposal to build an incinerator recently in Moss Landing. Is that what it's called, Moss's Landing? Which I understand has a different socioeconomic makeup than Santa Cruz, which is not a coincidence. These kinds of dirty technologies always follow the path of least resistance. They seek out the communities that are perceived to lack the educational or political or financial or other resources to fight them. So I don't know what the status is of that incinerator at Moss's Landing. I know there was a big opposition to it. If that is still active, and I can find out and let you know, you guys should fight that, because what it means is that the discards you generate here, instead of being recycled, will be sent to Moss's Landing to pollute a community of color, which is what happens with these things all over the world.
It's also a really huge wetland and a center around
National
a whole
marine
bunch of
sanctuary.
agricultural fields that go everywhere.
I'm sorry, I should know what the status of that incinerator is, but I'll find out and let you know.
We have 5 minutes left, so I just want to let you know and give you an opportunity to say any last things. Maybe this whole by design, by default, change by design, change by default notion, or a few more questions. I don't know how you want to use the last 5 minutes.
I want to also ask you guys to stay in touch. The best way to do that is to go to Story of Stuff website. There's a little button with a heart on it that says join our community. If you join the community, we'll let you know when we're doing things, when there's opportunities to take actions, when we're coming to your town. And also, if you're on Facebook, like our Facebook page, we have such a thriving Facebook community. It's really fun because there's people all over the world. So we'll post something and we get comments literally like from France and South Africa and India. And it's fun to have this international forum to discuss these issues. So please stay in touch.
I subscribed to your YouTube channel last night, and
Oh,
there's a bunch of stuff on there.
I know, I don't even know what's on there. All these volunteers put stuff up there, so I haven't even looked at it lately. I'll talk quickly about the change by design or default. I am going to talk a little bit about this tonight, so if you come, you'll hear this part again. But people often ask me, do I think change is possible? And I say, duh, we're right now using 1.5 planets worth of resources. Like you physically cannot use 1.5 planets worth of resources indefinitely when you only have one planet. So change is not just possible, it is inevitable. The question is not if we are going to change, but how we are going to change. Either we are going to change by design, which means we be proactive and intentional and compassionate and justice-oriented, and we figure out how are we going to redesign our physical and economic and social structures to live on this planet in a way that's sustainable and healthy and fair, and change by design, or we're going to change by default, which is we're going to keep hiding from the science, dig our heels in, say, as George Bush said, the American way of life is non-negotiable, keep just shopping, and not think about it, and we're going to start to see an ecosystem collapse. I don't know if you guys look at the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment. It's a study of a combination of 4,000 studies about the state of the planet. I was just looking at it the other day. Super depressing. But it says that 60% of the ecosystems they looked at globally are at or near serious degradation. That's a big deal. Like, we are really bumping up against ecosystem collapse. It is no longer theoretical. So if that happens, we are going to change by default or by disaster. So we can decide, do we change by design or do we change by default? Either way, it's going to be hard work. Either way, we're going to gain some things or lose some things. But if we choose to change by design, it will be so much more compassionate and so much more intelligent and so much more just. I like to think of it as we are on a bus, and the bus is going to turn. It is going to turn. We have a choice of being at the steering wheel or getting run over. Either way, the bus is turning. And it's really up to people like you who have the space and the environments like this to think about how to do design. It's really up to people like you that will determine, are we gonna change by design or change by disaster? I believe it is possible to change by design. I think that the window for doing that is shrinking, that we need to get to it. I think that we have an advantage, which is both scary and an advantage, which is that the ecosystem really is starting to collapse. Back when I was in college in the 80s, caring about the environment really was optional. You could do art or medicine or law or architecture or the environment. It's no longer optional, no matter what we do. If you want to be an activist, or if you want to be an architect, or you want to be a doctor, or you want to be an artist, whatever, there is a role for you to play in making sure that we change by design. We are going to have more people ready to change as the ecosystem collapse becomes more visible, but we're also going to have a lot of people hurt and suffering. We need to make sure that we do not leave them behind, and we make sure that we are charting a new path towards not just a sustainable future, but a more just and equitable one too. But I think we can still do it. There's time, we can do it, and life is going to be a lot sweeter once we get there.
Can we do it?
Yeah.